welcome to the Circle Sessions featuring the Circle of Experts. The Circle of Experts are Yasmin Robles from Robles Designs, Tanisha English Amamu of TJE Communications, and Don the Idea Guy. I'm Brett Johnson from Circle 270 Media Podcast Consultants. Each week, one of the Circle of Experts joins me to talk about critical aspects of growing your podcast. We focus on marketing, social media, monetization, and website design, and the implementation of all of these. This week you've got me, Brett Johnson, known to my clients as my podcast guy. Why you should get interviewed on podcasts. Well, when you get interviewed on a podcast, you can trust that you'll be heard by a highly targeted and engaged audience. If someone is willing to listen to a 30, 45, 60-minute interview with you, you can bet that they're interested in your topic. Let's cover 4 great reasons to be interviewed on podcast. Build relationships with influencers in your industry, also known as networking. Yeah, the one thing all podcast hosts have in common is influence. They have audiences of people who choose to listen to them. So for that reason alone, building a relationship with these people is a pretty darn good idea. Being interviewed on someone's podcast is a great way to kickstart a relationship with them, which can lead to a number of opportunities like referrals to other podcasts, repeat interviews on their podcast, in-person speaking engagements, guest blogging, even partnerships or joint ventures. They don't take a lot of time to do. Not counting the amount of time it takes to find a podcast and schedule an interview, it just doesn't actually take a lot of time to record a podcast interview. Most podcast interviews are between 30 to 45 minutes long, and that is plenty of time to tell your story and share some of your best advice. Compare that to the amount of time it would take you to write an article for another website, probably a few hours, correct? 30 to 45 minutes of your time in exchange for exposure to hundreds, maybe thousands of listeners is a pretty good use of your time. Increase your trust factor. Well, audio content, as we know, because we're podcasters, is very personal. And when someone hears your voice, they can almost immediately decide if they like you. And as they listen to you share your story and advice, they get to know and trust you. Increase visitors to your website. Most podcast hosts create a blog post, usually from their podcast show notes, for each episode they publish. So on that page, they'll typically include a link to your website so their listeners can learn more about you or get in touch with you if they want to. It's also pretty standard for a podcast host to mention your website in the podcast or ask you how their listeners can reach you during the interview. Both scenarios help bring more visitors to your website. Podcasting is a marathon, not a sprint. Be patient, take action, and apply yourself. Now, let's talk about what podcasting can do for your business in the next 12 months. Whether you're B2C or B2B, we can create a content marketing strategy that will work for you. Connect with me if you'd like to talk more about this. My calendar is available on my Circle 270 Media Podcast Consultants business website at circle270media.com. Or if it's easier to remember, just go to mypodcastguy.com. While you're there, be sure to subscribe to my free weekly My Podcast Guy newsletter. It's chock full of podcast news you may have missed, as well as social media, podcast marketing, and audio production tips and insights on how to grow your business podcast.